How's everybody doing today? Welcome to day 3, first day pre-day. Now we're in day 2. I hope you guys have had a fantastic 2 days here at the AWS Summit. We're so excited to have you back on the 10th annual. And get ready for a phenomenal fireside chat. I'm so excited to have my leader, my boss, and the individual who really was the reason we founded the Worldwide Public Sector business to the stage with me. Andy Jassy, the CEO of AWS. Please put your hands together for Andy. I'm always glad to get Andy here in Washington, D.C. I'm trying to get him to come more often. Don't y'all agree? Think you should come more often? Andy, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You've been flying around everywhere, visiting customers and talking to partners, and now you're here. So let's jump into some questions about the business and public sector.
Great.
So Andy, you've seen incredible growth in the last 10 years since we started the public sector business. Did you ever expect to see this type of growth and this momentum?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and it's great to see all of you. I mean, it's unbelievable. When I think back just about 10 years ago, when we started thinking about building a public sector business, I remember having lunch with Teresa, and we talked quite a bit about it because it was something that was different from what the rest of Amazon had done in our first 14 years of being a company. And we talked a lot about how the world was changing really fast, even though we don't always recognize how fast the world is changing around us. And just the incredible need across governments, across educational institutions, and across nonprofits to be able to do more for your customers and your constituents for less money, to totally change the value, the customer experience and the value that you provide for your constituents. And so we got very passionate about building that business, and we started about 10 years ago in earnest, and it's amazing to see how many people are here today. And we have 5,000 government organizations worldwide using AWS, about 10,000 academic institutions, and about 28,000 nonprofits. So, in the government side, of course, the intelligence community and JPL, NASA, and FINRA, and the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and National Health Service in the UK. And on the academic side, you see universities like MIT and Harvard and Carnegie Mellon and Notre Dame and Stanford. And on the nonprofit side, you've got 28,000. So you see organizations like the American Heart Association and Thorn and PBS, just an incredible array of customers that we're helping to accomplish more for their customers for less. And I'd argue that we're still in the early stages of the heart of adoption in the public sector. And I'd say in the US, I think in the US we're about 12 to 36 months ahead of where some of the other countries are, but it's growing really fast. And when you have a value proposition that allows organizations to get that much more done for less for their constituents, it's powerful.
And Andy has been a believer in public sector, which, we always like to say, public sector is not for the faint of heart, for sure. But from day one, and it continues, you've been a big believer in really helping public sector customers have that same access to amazing technology that AWS provides. So Andy, let's talk about kind of the pace of innovation. Most industries have an inverse relationship between size and speed of innovation, and also security. Yet clearly at AWS, you've bucked this in what we're doing there. And a lot of our customers want to know how you've done that. How are you able to innovate so quickly at such a large scale?
Well, first of all, as you well know, it's not me. It's really the team and the business, and you can't build anything significant at a scale close to the size of ours without an incredible team that is very like-minded and mission-driven. And that's at the heart of everything we do. But I think there are a few things that we have done that have worked well for us in being able to innovate at a rapid clip. I think the first is that we disproportionately index in hiring builders. And we think of builders as people who like to invent, people who look at different customer experiences and are honest about what's wrong with them and seek to reinvent those customer experiences, people who get that getting to launch is the starting line and not the finish line. At a lot of technology companies, people are really interested until you get to launch, and then they lose interest. And the reality is nothing that you build that's really meaningful and lasting do you get perfectly right from the get-go. You have to listen to customers, and you have to keep iterating on their behalf. So we disproportionately index in hiring builders, and then we organize them in as small and separable and autonomous teams as we possibly can, where we let them own their own destiny. In the early days of Amazon, we used to have a different group that did product management, a different group that did engineering, a different group that did operations, and there was all this finger pointing when projects didn't go right. Product management would say, oh, this would have been done much faster if engineering had gotten this done quicker, and engineering would say, well, this would have gotten done faster if product management gave me the requirements quicker, and ops would say, the folks in engineering built this thing and threw it over the wall, and that's why it's not operating right. And what we did was we put all of those folks on a particular product together on the same team. And so what that does is it totally eliminates the finger pointing. And I tell you what, if you're writing the code and you're going to be paged with a problem at 2 a.m., the code magically gets better. And so we try to organize everybody together. There's no finger pointing. And then the ownership is very high. And those teams are able to focus just on their customers and listen to what matters and then adjust that roadmap dynamically. So we organize, we hire builders, we organize them in separable teams, and then we give those teams the same building blocks that we give all of you, which is AWS. And I think one of the more interesting stories in Amazon, which hasn't been told to the same extent as AWS, is just how fast our consumer business in Amazon has iterated and invented over the last 12 years, and they would tell you that a good portion of that is because they get to use AWS. And then I think as organizations get larger, and this is where some of the as you get bigger, it has an inverse impact on whether or not you innovate comes in, is that leadership teams tend to get more conservative. They will often walk into meetings looking for ways to say no to new ideas, and not because they're ill-willed. It's just that there's so much going on and there's so much more to lose, and you tend to get more conservative as you get bigger. And I would say at Amazon, the opposite is true. Roy Disney used to call that the institutional no, that senior leadership team looking to say no to new ideas, and we think of it as the institutional yes. If you watch us in our meetings on new ideas, we don't say yes to everything, but we are working really hard as a leadership team to get to yes and to problem solve to get to yes. And then I think the last thing is that if you're going to invent at a really rapid clip, you have to be willing to fail. And that's a really interesting dichotomy for us at Amazon, because we hire very type A, achievement-oriented people who hate to fail. And so you have to make them comfortable with the fact that some of the invention is not going to work if you're really pushing the envelope. And I found the phone experiment that we did, which some of you may know, we launched a phone. It didn't exactly work. And I found that very culturally reaffirming for us, because the way we look at most things at Amazon is we look at, there are outputs and inputs. Outputs are, the ultimate output of a business, if you're a public company, is your share price, and other outputs are things like free cash flow and profit margins and revenue, but you can't manage the outputs. It's the inputs that drive the outputs. And so we spend almost all of our time as a company and a leadership team thinking about how are we performing against the inputs. And when we looked at the phone, it turned out that we had the value proposition on what we thought would be a compelling differentiator wrong. But a lot of the inputs were really good. It was a great team that we built with really difficult technology that we delivered on time. And so even though it didn't work out, we took all those people that were really good on the inputs and found great jobs for them. And if you don't do that, by the way, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. All the great people will never go work on the risky new initiatives because it could be a career ender for them. So we took the people who did really well on the inputs, put them in other important jobs, and then took all the learning from the technology and used it in other products. And so when you have a culture that hires builders, organizes them into separable teams where they get to control their own destiny, gives them AWS building blocks to move much more quickly at less cost, then has a leadership team that's looking to say yes to new ideas and will tolerate failure if the inputs are good, what you find is a lot of your people at every level of the organization will start to spend their free cycles thinking about new ideas, because most people like to build.
Yeah, it's so true. And that people who don't know us, you really, to be at Amazon, it's part of the culture to have new ideas and bring new ideas to the table. And it's all about helping your customer do their work better. Yeah. And so Andy, you gave a really good overview on how kind of what we're doing, how we innovate. Now let's talk about how we help our customers innovate. So if you can talk about that, and also within, specifically public sector, that'd be great.
Well, I think if you look at the vast array of enterprises and public sector organizations that are moving to the cloud, almost always cost is the conversation starter. For most, if you can turn capital expense into a variable expense at a lower variable expense than you could do at your own, and then also you get that elasticity, so you don't have to guess how much capacity you need and provision for the peak and then sit on all that wasted capital, that is very compelling. But the number one reason by a fair bit that enterprises and public sector organizations are moving to the cloud is speed and agility. And if you look at, in the old world, if you needed a server to try an experiment or put something in Integ, it would take you 10 to 18 weeks to get that server. And then if you actually had some success and wanted to roll it out, it took meaningfully longer. And then you also, once you had the servers, you have to build all that infrastructure software around it, the compute and the storage and the database and the analytics and the machine learning and the content distribution and the messaging. In the cloud, it's a radically different situation. You can provision thousands of servers in minutes. And then we have 165 plus services that you can mix and match together however you see fit, which means that you get from idea to implementation in several orders of magnitude faster, which completely changes how quickly you can get missions done. And the other really interesting thing that it's done is that at so many organizations historically, a lot of people didn't spend their free time in the organization thinking about new ideas, because why bother? It was so unlikely you were going to be able to implement anything anytime soon. But with the cloud and the way that it allows you to get from an idea that you had on a Friday night to actually trying it the next week, it totally changes how many people in the organization will spend their free cycles thinking about innovation. And now what we find with organizations that adopt the cloud in a meaningful way, it's not just the top few people in the company who are doing all the new idea generations, it's everywhere in the company. And so that has really changed the equation for public sector organizations and enterprises.
It really has. Also, I think the thing, that you've been a huge proponent of is our security and compliance, which really helped our public sector customers have the confidence, because we were so out there in the early days about security is kind of thing first for us all the time.
Yeah, it's true. I would say the first 5 or 6 years that we were pursuing AWS, security was the biggest blocker in growing in the enterprise and the public sector, not because there was a security issue, but just because it was a different model and people were nervous about it. We would have these conversations where we'd say, well, what's blocking you from moving and making progress? Because people would be really excited. And they'd say, well, I'm a little worried about security. And we'd say, well, what are you worried about? And they'd say, well, I'm worried about losing control of my data.
Yeah.
We'd say, you realize that when you put data into AWS, you get to pick which region it's in. It doesn't move unless you choose to move it. It just looks like a blob to us. And if you're extra paranoid about it, you can encrypt it in motion or at rest. And then people would say, okay, that makes sense, but I'm worried about just not being able to touch the iron. And we would say, well, how often do you go touch the iron? It doesn't seem to happen all that often. And but it was a different model, a different paradigm for people. And what we've found, interestingly, over the last 6 years of AWS, is that security has been one of the biggest selling points for people moving to AWS and for people using the cloud. And most people who have done any research about how AWS works and the security capabilities we have feel like their security posture improves moving to AWS versus what they were doing on premises.
Yeah, and now we're having our first security conference.
Yes, we have Reinforce coming in Boston in just a couple weeks.
I think we have a lot of people in this audience who are probably going to attend that.
Yeah.
So Andy, I remember you and I having a conversation about kind of creating a business line for not-for-profits. And we kind of believe that we could help, the social impact side of things. And we always talked about paving the way for disruptive innovation, but how do we do that and make the world a better place?
Yeah.
So today we're working with over 28,000 not-for-profits, and it's still early days, it's growing. But did you really think about AWS doing the kind of work to power these kind of social missions too?
Well, look, I think anybody who's worked on AWS from the start, like I have and some others have, would be lying if they knew how broad an impact we would have on how many types of organizations and companies throughout the world this quickly. I think we all were hopeful, but I don't think any of us had the audacity to predict the type of impact so far. And to your point, it's so early too, but it is really exciting to see how we've been a small part of helping nonprofits change the world. There's so many examples. I mean, I love what Thorn is doing in fighting human trafficking. If you just look at the advent of the internet has meant, really just a proliferation and people really being kidnapped and then trafficked for sex. And, they use recognition, our facial recognition technology, to match the advertisements for some of these individuals that they're sex trafficking, along with missing people, and to help find missing people. In fact, just last week it led to one of those discoveries. And I look at the Hutch, which is really one of the preeminent cancer research and care organizations in the world, and they have a problem where they have all of these people that want to be in clinical trials, but they have mountains of data that they have to match these individuals to qualify for these trials, diagnoses and symptoms and dosages and all kinds of things. And doing it manually, having to have somebody look at all that data, they can accomplish manually about 1.5 clinical notes an hour. And by using our natural language processing medical service, which is called Comprehend Medical, they're now able to go through 10,000 clinical notes an hour, which is, one thing that people with cancer don't have a lot of is time. And so that radically changes what you can do. Or look at the American Heart Association has built their precision medical platform on top of us, and they're basically taking all of this in the precision medicine platform. They've taken all these disparate data sets and stored them in AWS and then made them available to researchers so that they don't have to spend their time trying to gather these data sets from all these places and store them somewhere and have access and have the right tools to do research. Cardiovascular breakthroughs can happen at a much more rapid rate because of their use of AWS in the cloud. And those are 3 of many examples, and we're really proud to be a small part of them.
We really have. We've come a long way. I was thinking yesterday about the first time we moved the 1,000 genome data set to AWS in 2011.
Yeah.
And that week, we had 3,800 new researchers crowdsourced on that data because they had never been able to access it. And now here we are in 2019, and it's phenomenal progress, just the data point you made on Fred Hutch. So, and we had an obliterate here this week, which was kind of good. Thank you all. We've already met our goals, by the way, of $30,000 yesterday by midday, and people are still writing. So thank you all for your support on that. So Andy, you have a lot of experience now with this, but you talk a lot about sometimes the first step is the hardest, moving to cloud, but then after that, what should happen? How do customers get going?
Well, a lot of the biggest challenges for large organizations to move to the cloud aren't technical. A lot of them are people and culture. And if I look at the biggest difference makers between those who talk a lot about moving to the cloud and those that actually do and have success, they're a fewfold. I think first, you got to have a senior leadership team that's truly convicted that they want to move to the cloud. It is so easy for people in the middle and people all over the organization to block. Inertia is a very powerful thing. And if you don't have a senior leadership team that is all on the same page and convicted that they want to move to the cloud, you will find that there's a lot of things that get blocked along the way. And not only do you have to have that conviction and alignment, but you have to have a mechanism that forces you to constantly get updates on the table so you don't go 3 months thinking you're making progress when it turns out somebody elsewhere in the organization has put up a red flag and blocked it. So you got to be convicted as a senior leadership team. And then alongside that, our most successful organizations moving to the cloud set an aggressive top-down goal that forced the organization to move faster than it organically otherwise would. And there's a few examples. I mean, you can look at GE. GE's CIO, Jamie Miller at the time, decided that she was going to move to AWS, and they were going to move 50 applications in 30 days to AWS. And she got all her technical leaders together and told them that. And they all told her for 45 minutes what a terrible idea it was and how it couldn't be done. And she listened, she said, I hear you, but we're going to do it, so let's go. And they got to about 42 applications in 30 days, but in the process, they figured out their security model and their governance model and their compliance model and how to operate in the cloud. And they started having successes, and that built its own momentum. And suddenly, the ideas around the organization and what should move to the cloud came pouring in. And they're now 2/3 of the way through moving 9,000 applications to AWS. But it wouldn't have happened if they hadn't set that aggressive top-down goal. I'll give you a counterexample. There was a healthcare company in Europe I went to visit a few years ago, and I knew the CIO through a friend of a friend, and we were there to meet, and they were late getting out to the meeting, and the CIO ducked out of this meeting. I think he felt badly because we had this contact, and we got into the room, and he said, how are we doing? Tell me before my head of infrastructure gets in, tell me how we're doing. And I said, well, you really aren't doing very much on the cloud. And he said, that's not true. I've been told we're kicking the tires. And I said, well, you're running 3 EC2 instances. He said, are you sure about that? I said, well, that's what the team shared. Then the infrastructure guy walked in, and he said, John, what are we doing much in AWS? Oh, yes, we're kicking the tires. We're doing all kinds of experimentation. And he said, how many EC2 instances are we using? He said, like 3 or 4. And he said, that's not what I mean by actually moving to the cloud. But if you don't have an aggressive top-down goal that forces the org to move faster than it otherwise would, you can be kicking the tires and dipping your toe in the water for many years. And incidentally, he left that meeting and set a really aggressive top-down goal, and they are one of our top 3 pharmaceutical and healthcare companies on top of the platform now. But it takes those things. So conviction at the senior level, an aggressive top-down goal that forces the org to move faster than it otherwise would. Then I think that you got to train people. A lot of times, senior folks at the company and along with us get really excited about what you can do in the cloud, and then they come back to the company and say, good news, here's the cloud, and nobody is trained. Yeah. And so you really got to make sure that you train people so they're familiar and comfortable. It's not that hard as long as you learn the concepts. We train hundreds of thousands of people a year for that purpose, and would be happy to work with anybody here. Then the last thing I would say is that sometimes we find that organizations can get paralyzed if they can't figure out how to move every last workload. Yeah. And the reality is that there are so many workloads that you can easily move before you have to move the hardest ones that have the most dependency and the most legacy. That what we typically do is we work with organizations, and we'll do a portfolio analysis, and we'll characterize all your applications into the ones that are easy to move, medium hard to move, and the ones that should go last. And then we will also look at the ones that can easily be lifted and shifted, and which ones we think you should re-architect before you put in the cloud. And we'll build a sequenced plan over a few years to migrate. And by doing that, what people find is they get the benefits of the cloud for so many of their applications much more quickly, and it really helps inform how they do move the last applications. They have a better way to do it once they've got some experience. So those are the real difference makers, and those that move versus those that talk.
Yeah, in fact, I met with Maxar this morning. They said they were doing 100 certs in 100 days to certify people. And I thought that's a really good goal. Right. Like you're kind of plowing through those certifications and moving through it. But that's fantastic advice, Andy. So also our customers in public sector have a lot of hybrid infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And it's a big part of the cloud journey here because they do have a lot of these big, hairy, long legacy kind of applications, and they need to figure out what's the strategy of moving those. How can customers strategically leverage hybrid solutions in order to really tap the full potential of AWS?
Yeah, well, we've had this strong belief for many years now that we're going through this transition unlike any other we've seen in technology, at least in our lifetimes, with this move to the cloud. And in the fullness of time, We think that most organizations won't have data centers. All those workloads will move to the cloud, and those that do will have much smaller footprints than what they have right now. However, that transition is going to take many years, and I think we're very aware that organizations are going to want to run the on-premises data centers that they need to maintain for a period of time alongside AWS as seamlessly as possible. And it's why we built, over the last 8 years, capabilities like VPC and Direct Connect and our storage gateway. Those are all intended to make it easier for you to connect your on-premises data centers to run alongside AWS. But we had a lot of customers who said, you know, it's really great that you guys have built those capabilities, but we use VMware to run, for the software and tools to run our infrastructure, and have for many years, and invested a lot of cycles in that. And because you and VMware are not integrating in any meaningful way, it means I have to make this binary choice between either moving to the cloud and not being able to move with the VMware software tools I've invested in and having to start over there, or continuing to use those VMware tools, but just not easily move to the cloud. And that was a few years ago, and that really was the impetus for why AWS and VMware spent time together trying to figure out a solution. And we built something called VMware Cloud in AWS, which we launched about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. It's really off to an amazing start. It's really resonated with customers. And what it does is it allows you to run you're able to use those same software tools that you've used to run your infrastructure for many years, and you can use it to run your infrastructure in AWS. And that is a huge advantage for a lot of people, because virtually all the world is virtualized using VMware. And so that has been something that's really helped companies as they're moving to the cloud. Then we had a number of people who said, well, that's great, but that's great if I'm actually moving all those workloads to the cloud. What about if I have workloads that I can't move from on-premises for the next number of years? For whatever reason, oftentimes it needs to be close to something that lives on premises, like it could be a factory, or it could be, you know, in the field, or it could be something that, you know, you need in the theater, whatever it is. And so we thought really hard about what the right solution was. And we had seen the solutions that were out in the market to try and make that work before. And we really didn't like that model, because what it requires is, it's different hardware than what you're using in the cloud. It's different APIs, it's a different control plane, it's a different tool set, and it's different features, because you iterate much more quickly in the cloud than you do on premises in hardware or software that has to live in packaged software. I mean, we delivered over 2,000 services and features alone last year, and that's just the external facing pieces. We probably did 50,000 deployments during the year, things that people don't see behind the scenes. So we didn't like that model, and it wasn't getting traction with customers because they were so frustrated by the inconsistency and the difficulty of actually using that tool. And part of the problem is you're trying to bridge two unlike environments together with something that kind of tries to do both, but it's not really consistent. And so we thought really hard about that problem for a number of years, and it led to our building and announcing Outposts, which we announced at reInvent, which is our conference last November, and will be out later this year. And what that is we're going to deliver racks of compute and storage and database and analytics and machine learning. We'll deliver those on premises, and it'll be the same hardware you use in AWS. It'll be the same control plane, the same APIs, the same tools, the same. And so what that allows you to do is you now have a solution for the things that have to live on premises to be low latency to something that has to be local. But you get to use all the same APIs and all the same tools and control plane with everything else you use in AWS in all the public regions. And that Outpost is almost just like a VPC in whatever the closest local public region is to you. And so that is something that people are really excited about. And people feel like, instead of it being this weird kind of wonky bridge between two unlike things, it's almost like distributing AWS to on-premises.
We have so many customers in the public sector that are interested in Outpost. once we announced it at reInvent, it was probably like, we were like, okay, we can't get it to them fast enough. So our customers are very excited. In VMware, we have tons of users with VMware, and we're already getting pretty amazing wins with them. So it's great to see, and I think our customers are happy. They have options now when it comes to hybrid.
Yeah.
So Andy, once customers get to the cloud, what are kind of the key technologies that they're embracing?
Boy, there are a lot of those. There's so many that are interesting, but I'll limit myself to just a few. I think that if you look in the compute side, people will use EC2 instances, I think, for the foreseeable future. But increasingly, we see more and more organizations that are using smaller units of compute. And so containers have become really big. And most organizations have a managed Kubernetes service out there, which we have as well, called EKS. Mm-hmm. We also have a container service called ECS, which we built a couple of years before Kubernetes became really popular, and that is continuing to grow unbelievably fast. And having two choices for customers, it really comes down to what they value most. If what you value most is the deepest integration with all of the AWS platform capabilities, you'll use ECS, which, because we control ECS, we're able to integrate every new thing we build right from the get-go with ECS. If you're most interested in Kubernetes because of the openness of it, and that's what you want to build on, then people use EKS. It's actually well integrated with our platform, but it'll take longer to get all the pieces integrated just because we have a broad open source community we have to work with to make that a reality. And then increasingly what we see in the container space is that we have customers who want to manage not at the server and cluster level, but at the task layer and abstraction higher. And that's why we built Fargate, which is really a serverless container capability, and that is unbelievably fast growing. Yes. And so, as I said, most organizations have a managed Kubernetes service. We have 3 offerings in that space, which is why so many people are running containers on us. Also, increasingly, we see people using event-driven serverless compute as the way that they're building their software. And I think this next generation of software developers are going to grow up not thinking about servers and clusters and building in a serverless fashion. It's unbelievable how fast Lambda and all the associated serverless capabilities we have is growing. So the first thing is that in compute, the basic unit of compute is getting smaller. The second thing is that databases is changing quite a bit. And I would tell you that most of our customers say, thank God. It's been a really difficult place for most companies the last 20 to 30 years with the choices they've had. And I think that most people are pretty frustrated with the older guard database solutions, the Oracles and the SQL servers of the world. They're expensive, they're proprietary, they have high lock-in, they're constantly auditing you and then fining you unless you buy more from them. It's just a model people are sick of, and it's why people have been trying to move as quickly as they can to open engines like MySQL and Postgres and MariaDB. But to get the same performance on those open engines you get in the commercial grade old guard engines takes a lot of work. And that's why we spent a few years building Aurora, which is, it allows you, it is 100% compatibility with MySQL and Postgres in both those editions. So there's no lock-in that way. It's as fault tolerant and available as the commercial grade solutions, but it's 1/10 of the cost. It's the fastest growing service in the history of AWS. It continues to be even several years after we've launched. It's incredible how many people are moving from those older guard database solutions to Aurora. The other thing that's really interesting in the database space is that the days of using a relational database to solve all your workload database requirements are over. People are realizing that you want the right purpose-built database to solve whatever problem you want. So if you need a key value store, we have DynamoDB. If you need an in-memory store, we have Elasticache. If you need a graph database, we have Neptune. We announced at reInvent a ledger service in QLDB and a time series database offering and time stream. So we have a lot more capabilities, and customers in this day and age and modern technology companies realize that having the right tool for the job allows you to save money and people. So database is changing a lot. Machine learning and AI, which I'm sure you heard a lot about. We'll probably talk a little bit later in this talk about just, I think that virtually every application in 10 years will be infused in some way by machine learning and AI. Now, I think the edge is another piece. When people talk about hybrid, when I think about hybrid in 10 to 20 years, the on-premises part of hybrid is not going to be servers. Almost all those servers are going to move to the cloud. The on-premises part is going to be devices. They're going to be billions, maybe trillions of devices in our homes, in our office, in factories, in planes and cars and ships and oil fields and agricultural fields, everywhere. And those devices have these sensors which have disproportionately little CPU and disk, which makes the cloud really important to supplement them. Most of the big IoT applications that have been built over the last few years have been built using AWS to supplement them. And if you think about what you can do at the edge now, the combination of AWS IoT and Greengrass means that you can have a single pane of glass for your developers, and they can figure out which are the triggers that they see where they want to do the processing and analytics in the cloud, and which are the ones that they want to do on the device itself if you don't want to take the round trip latency to the cloud. And they have the same programming interface to do it, and it makes it much simpler to collect data from these devices at the edge, do the large-scale analytics, pick predictive algorithms that you can run on the devices themselves, and then do the predictions at the edge. And that totally changes what's possible.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's so much for customers to choose from, and we spent time yesterday in my keynote talking about the right tool for the right job, because not every workload's the same. And that's the reason AWS innovates, because our customers keep saying to us, we need these tools, and we innovate on behalf of them. So Andy, you talked a little bit, you touched on machine learning and AI. Can we go a little bit deeper into that? Because there's pretty much not any customer I talked to today that doesn't want to really understand how can they use machine learning and AI in their mission, in their enterprise. Can you share any lessons with customers here?
Yeah, I think that most of the customers we work with are very interested in machine learning. Almost every conversation has some element. And I think that while there's an incredible amount of progress being made in organizations using machine learning and AI, we're still at the relative beginning. We see a lot of it. We have about twice as much machine learning being run in AWS than anywhere else. And yet it's really early for most organizations. And we think of it as having 3 macro layers of the stack. And we think in the fullness of time, most organizations that have significant technology capabilities will use all 3 of these. But at that bottom layer of the stack is for expert machine learning practitioners who are comfortable operating at the framework level. And these are folks that know how to build machine learning models and train them and tune them and deploy them. And they're comfortable working with TensorFlow or MXNet or PyTorch 2 or Caffe 2. And we have a little bit different philosophy there than the other providers who are largely directing people into just TensorFlow. And TensorFlow has the most resonance, and we have a lot of TensorFlow on the platform. About 85% of the TensorFlow on the cloud is on AWS. But we've been doing machine learning at Amazon for over 20 years, and we can tell you that there are workloads where different frameworks are better. So if you're doing recommender systems or video analytics, or natural language processing, MXNet is the framework that scales the best. Or if you're doing computer vision, it turns out that PyTorch 2 or Caffe 2 is the best framework. And so we will support all those frameworks equally well. And I promise that in 18 months, there will be some other different framework that people are excited about. And again, we want you to be able to use the right tool for the job. If you want machine learning, though, to be as expansive as we all want it to be, across organizations and companies, you have to solve the problem of making it much more accessible to people who aren't machine learning expert practitioners, of which there are very few in the world, by the way. And so we built something called SageMaker, which we think of at that middle layer of the stack, which is an abstraction that makes it much easier to visualize data, figure out which algorithms, frameworks to use, train the data, tune the data, and deploy it in a fault-tolerant way. And that makes it much, much easier for everyday developers and data scientists to build and deploy machine learning models. And it's incredible to us how many thousands of organizations are now standardizing on top of SageMaker. It's totally changed the game in terms of people making progress there. And then at that top layer of the stack are typically the services people call AI because they mimic human cognition. And these are things like turn text to speech, or turn audio and transcribe into text, or take that transcribed text and translate it into lots of languages, or take that transcribed, translated text and tell me what's in it. Do natural language processing so I don't have to have somebody read it. Or help me do personalization, or help me do forecasting, or help me do OCR, including all the data in tables and forms. All of those are examples of where customers don't want to have to build the algorithms themselves. They want to actually give us inputs and use our algorithms that we've built from all of our expertise and data in those areas and spit out answers via APIs. And we have a very large investment and a large number of services across all three layers of that stack. And of course, when you do machine learning, something that organizations sometimes forget is that it's not just the machine learning, it starts with the right data storage capability and the right data lake. And we have over 10,000 data lakes that are built on top of AWS, and the right security, and the right access control, and the right analytics, along with the right machine learning capabilities. And there's nobody who has the set of capabilities we do, which is why so much of it is being done on AWS.
So it's so true. It's catching on, and I think, for the first time, there are these tools that enable the ability of these organizations to quickly learn and adopt these algorithms for whatever their need is. So let's talk about the national security and defense space. Yesterday, I told the audience that we were unwavering in our support of our national defense and intelligence. I just saw you on Code, where you told a very different kind of Silicon Valley audience, like from around the world, the same thing. And in 2013, we were honored with the ability to build a cloud for the U.S. intelligence community, which really not only helped, I think, the intelligence community, but many other enterprises kind of said, okay, this is a milestone for adoption of the cloud. But why do you think that's been so pivotal for others, and also will be helpful in folks like DoD as they think about moving faster to the cloud?
Well, back in 2013, when we earned the intelligence community's business, the cloud was just picking up mainstream adoption in the enterprise and the public sector. And so that was a big turning point. As you know, we wouldn't have even been able to mention that if not for the protests there. So that created a lot of awareness, and it not only really helped get governments on track using the cloud, but it was a huge impact in the enterprise, because so many enterprises said, if it's secure enough and performant enough for the intelligence community of the United States, it's probably secure enough and performant enough for us. And it just changed people's outlook. So it had a huge impact. And I think if you listen to the intelligence community, and Sean Roche has talked about this publicly, I think they're having a great deal of success on top of AWS. And what it's really done is it has helped them move much more quickly in accomplishing the mission at a rate that wasn't really viable before. And when I talk to government organizations today who haven't moved to the cloud, and they point to what the intelligence community is doing, or even what commercial enterprises are doing, they say, I want to move that fast.
Yeah.
The gravity and the importance of our mission requires us to move this fast. And so that's really what's changed. And I think at a time where there is an urgent need and there is a large amount of unrest around the world right now, as opposed to some companies who are backing away from supporting the government, we are unwavering in our support to serve government. I think in our world, if our government doesn't have access to the most modern, sophisticated technology to accomplish their mission, given the role that we play in the world, we're in trouble. Yeah. We're really committed to making that happen for them.
Yeah, so agree. Andy, on a multi-cloud approach, are you seeing our commercial customers or public sector customers take a multi-cloud approach today?
I think that most organizations, big organizations, as they start to move to the cloud, think maybe what I'm going to do is split up my workloads across 2 or 3 clouds rather evenly. And in reality, very few do that. The vast majority predominantly choose a cloud provider. And the reason they don't do it is if you do, you have to standardize on the lowest common denominator. And these platforms are in pretty wildly different stages in terms of capability and ecosystem and maturity at this point. And then the second thing is that it's pretty hard to move from on-premises to the cloud. That's a big change endeavor. And to ask your developers to not only have to be fluent in the cloud, but then be fluent across multiple platforms is very unpopular and very unproductive. And it wastes a lot of people and a lot of resource. And then the third thing is that all the cloud providers have volume discounts. And so you're really delevering your buying capability by splitting it across multiple providers. So when you get into the practicality and the rigor of deciding how to move to the cloud in a pervasive way, the vast majority of organizations predominantly choose a cloud provider. Now, there are some who say, I really want to make sure that in case the relationship goes sideways with that cloud provider, or I have a team that just so passionately wants to try it with this. Some will end up having another cloud provider that they'll run some portion of workloads, but it's not like 50-50 or 60-40. Yeah. It tends to be that people are more like 80-10, 80-20 or 90-10 on a cloud provider, and the smaller portion being on a second cloud.
Yeah,
that's what we typically see.
So let's talk about the problems facing our country. What do you, in your opinion, what's some of the biggest problems facing the country, and how can we help? How can tech help?
Well, gosh, there are so many issues that we have right now in the country, and there's a lot of good things in the country, and there are a lot of issues. And I think if you look at things like the income disparity and homelessness, those are big issues in our country right now. But in some ways, those are outputs. They're because of some other things. And if I look at the input that I think is the biggest problem in the country right now, I think it's education. I think we are really in an educational crisis in this country, and for whatever reason, nobody seems to acknowledge it. And we are now ranked 35th out of 50 developed countries in the world in education. Mm-hmm. And if we don't actually believe that that's going to have an impact on our competitiveness for our kids and our kids' kids, we are kidding ourselves. And it's interesting. We have lost so many jobs in the middle of our country. We've got, for years and years, people have been able to go get a high school education and follow their parents into the mines, the factories, the fields, the mills, and those jobs are gone, and they don't appear to be coming back anytime soon. And so millions and millions of people have dropped out of the middle class in our country, and they're unhappy about it, and they're right to be unhappy about it. It's kind of not what the American dream and promise is. And really, if you look in our country, we actually have a lot of jobs, mm-hmm. and we have certain segments of the economy that are booming, but we're not educating our people so they can participate in that economy. And it's interesting when you're in a rut, when you're 35th out of 50 developed countries in education, and you have a lot of people who aren't being educated so they can participate in the economy, you would think that the only way out of that rut, and this is true of commercial sectors, mm-hmm. is to innovate, is to try all kinds of things. I'm blown away. I live in Washington State. I can't believe some of the opposition to something like charter schools, which to me is not even that innovative. Yeah. It's like a tweak on our education system, and they the good charter schools have really good results, but they're not a panacea. They're just part of solving the problem. But we should be trying all kinds of experiments in education, as long as we're being responsible for the kids, because it's not about protecting what we have today. Right. It's about doing what's right for kids and for the people who are going to be the future of the country. And so, to me, we must find a way to fix that.
Agree. we talked a lot yesterday about working backwards from the skills that employers need to put these individuals to work. And the programs we have been working on with like Nova and others, all the curriculum is truly about working backwards. What is it that the employers need? And we've always said we've got to put people to work. And I'll share a story. I'm from a small town in Kentucky, Andy.
Yeah.
I was just there, and the superintendent of the school system shared with me that because of the opioid crisis, 50% of the students in that school system, their parents are either going to prison, coming out of prison, or waiting to go to prison. They're being raised by their grandchildren. It's affected health, it's affected the education, the whole dynamics. And when I was being raised there was nothing like that happening.
Yep.
So you're right, this huge shift, and we've got to do something about it.
Yep.
So thank you for your passion on that. Well, I have two more questions. Before I ask the last one, I was looking at your socks. Are those the New York Giants?
No, they have New York Giants colors, but they're football helmets.
They're
Yes.
just helmets. Okay, Andy's a big Giants fan, so I was trying to figure the socks out. So how are the Giants going to do this? Like, what's happening with them?
Are you trying to taunt me right
No,
now?
no. I just wondered. I know we're always hopeful.
It was a rebuilding era for us the last couple of years. And I don't know. I'm optimistic about our quarterback choice, but we'll see.
Well, I can tell you it's the same for
It's a hard job to be the general manager of the New York Giants.
Yes,
They've got
of course. I can tell
hard
you
at
for the
it.
Redskins fans in the audience, I think they feel the same way.
Yeah, you
so.
probably enjoyed our quarterback pick here.
All right, so here's our last question. Why is now the time for public sector customers to really accelerate their cloud journey? Why is now the right time?
Well, the world is changing really quickly, and you can see it in every segment in business or in the public sector. I mean, look at what's happening with startups. You have these startups from a standing start. They're totally disrupting long-standing industries. Look at what Airbnb has done in the accommodation space. Look at what Pinterest did in the visual search space. Look at what Slack has done for teams. You can look at what Uber and Lyft and Ola and Grab have done for ride sharing and delivery. I mean, just from standing starts. And enterprises have figured that out as well. And again, you see the same thing. If you look at how Netflix has totally revolutionized the way that we watch entertainment, or look at Capital One totally reinventing their commercial banking system, their digital commercial banking system on top of AWS, or Barclays moving everything to AWS. So look at Volkswagen totally reinventing their industrial capabilities in production and logistics and manufacturing. All of them are doing them on top of AWS, but they are huge, huge changes in how they're doing business. And I think the same is true in the public sector. And if you look at our world right now, these are tricky times. There is a lot of unrest and a lot of tension between countries, probably a lot more than all of us realize. You have a situation where we have a lot of homelessness and a lot of income disparity right now. You have an educational system in crisis. You look at the United States, we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the imprisoned population of the world. That is whacked. We have way too many people in jail, and it's disproportionately skewed toward Black and African American people. There is a racial equality issue that we have to confront and deal with and fix in the country. It's wrong what's happening. And we still all know lots of people who are still dying all the time from cancer. I mean, we have so many organizations working so hard and doing such amazing work, but we have to solve that problem. And so I don't mention those things to be a downer, but those are the issues of our day right now. And I don't think there was ever a time where it was okay to move slowly, but now is definitely not that time. We need solutions, and technology can be the solution to a lot of these problems. The people in this room who work in the public sector, you have the most important missions that will impact all of our lives. And you have the ability with the cloud and with AWS to have the type of cost structure, array of capabilities and services, speed and opportunity that unlike any time in our history to go address a lot of these issues. And so if now is not a time to giddy up,
Yeah.
I don't know what time is, and we're excited about you pursuing. We'll be there every step of the way to try to help.
Thank you, Andy. All right, please give Andy a big round of applause so we can get him back soon.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.